We need to slow global warming. Global warming needs to be slowed in order to prevent further ongoing climate issues. Global warming causes changes in the climate that mainly affect our ozone layer. CO2 emissions are the main benefactor to said global warming. Changes in climate can affect not only things such as what we learned in school, like animals, environments, and things like that, but it's also getting to a point now where it is also affecting people's living environments as well, which we will learn more about. Throughout this presentation, you will learn more about these issues as well as global warming and what's currently being done about it. First, let's examine what we need to do about CO2 and how I can persuade you to lower your contributions to the problem. So first, we'll take a look at current fuel projections right now. We have oil leading the way at 33%. Coal is coming in at second place at 27%, with gas coming up at 24%. Now, biofuels is the number one thing that we're talking about here in this presentation that we really want to see an increase in, because that's the healthiest fuel form right now, that it's best for the environment, it's the least harmful for the ozone layer, and that's only at 1% right now. So that's definitely a major concern and something that we need to focus on if we are going to prevent something like global warming and preventing further climate change. If we don't act now, it's no longer waiting to see what's going to happen. If we don't change now, we could see major drastic effects happening in anywhere from 20 to 30 years. CO2 emissions are causing huge changes in the ozone layer compared to the last 20 years ago. When it comes to residential CO2 and biofuel, if people would ride share, such as using Uber or ride bikes or walk or carpool with friends, family, things of that nature, you could see a huge reduction in residential CO2 emissions, at least 10% within the next 10 years. And that's crucial right now because that's what's putting off is a ton of CO2 emissions right now is residential traffic weight. Local compact growth programs are something that are being worked on right now by local governments and legislature, but that is something that we are seeing political pushback on, so that's something that we are going to have to work with to get working to our advantage. Because of this political pushback, we could see delays for CO2 emission management and reduction, so we are going to currently rely on fossil fuels and things like that, which is something that is not good, but it's pretty much all we have to rely on currently, with biofuels only leading the way at 1%, or not leading the way, but as you saw, it's only at 1%. Something that was introduced, it was the metric GWP bioscale that was introduced that indicates potential impacts of global carbon emissions, which is very beneficial to us. So now we don't just know it's just residential CO2 areas. We actually can pinpoint more close range where these areas are and what we can do about it and things like that. So this is what I talked about in the beginning of the presentation. All growing up, we learned about climate change in school, about dangers of, the rainforest being wiped out and animal deforestation and things like that. But now it's getting to the point we've ignored climate change for so long, it's actually starting to affect our climate and where we live as well. According to an article, risk of overheating in low-rise, naturally ventilated residential buildings of northeast India. They're actually seeing that they have natural, or not exactly natural, but they have concrete houses that have been lived in for a long time now, and it's been completely fine with no issues whatsoever. And due to global warming and climate change, these are now becoming extreme, uncomfortable temperature zones, is what it was described as in the article, making it unstable to live in. So they are going through right now, seeing what they can do to make these much more stable living environments for people until we can curb CO2 emissions and actually make a progress and an indent on reducing global warming. Another thing that really surprised me and I thought would be kind of beneficial in the fight against global warming is in another article titled The Algae Facade for Reducing CO2 Emission and Mitigating Global Warming, is they're introducing algae to absorb carbon dioxide and decrease high air temperatures of these buildings, and the algae actually responds to surfaces and to climate change. So you would essentially be turning just a regular old building into an actual living house. We have to be aware about this problem before we can participate in actually changing this problem. There was an article I read called Raising Students' Awareness of Climate Change. They talked about one of the most effective ways to communicate climate change issues is by using a form of communication known as binding communication, which, as you can see, consists in combining a persuasive message and an act linked to a persuasive message. So with that being said, that brings me to my conclusion. Global warming will always be a danger. It's something that we've heard about as a childhood that is already just a slow growing problem to now it can't wait any longer. Action is needed now before irreversible damage is done to our environment. We can prevent these dangers that we are already seeing, but now that you are armed with this knowledge, you can actually take a fight against CO2 emissions. And that concludes the presentation.